Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. What we have for you today is going to be part 2 to the lower control arm bushing replacement. The reason for part 2 is that there's some things that we wanted to show you in addition to part 1. Number 1, sometimes those cam adjuster sleeves are going to be rusted into the sleeve of the bushing. It's not just rigs that are in the salt belts of the country where they salt the roads due to ice. It could even happen in California, because it just happened to me this morning. I found out that 2 of my cam adjusters are locked up and I can't get them out. They're going to have to be cut out. The other thing that we want to show you is that some people using the bottle jack technique have managed to bend their lower control arms and basically destroy them. They bent out the arms too much, using a little bit too much force. And maybe that's because the bushing is just really rusted in there, or maybe their technique might not be that good. I don't really know, but what we do want to show you is an option to use a press instead of the bottle jack technique to get those bushings out and the new ones back in. Cutting out the cam sleeves if you find one or more of your cam sleeves are locked into the bushing. And then number 2, the second way to do the press work if you happen to own a hydraulic press. For the cutting of the cam sleeves out of the bushing, these blades, they're called Diablo Demon carbide tip blades. These blades supposedly cut really well and the blades last a long time. I just bought a couple of these from Home Depot. They're about 12 bucks a piece. Obviously, if you go online, you could probably find them for cheaper, but I needed them today. The first thing we're going to do is I'm going to get my cordless reciprocating saw out, hook up this blade to it, and we're going to show you how you can cut those cam sleeves out. If you're wondering what I'm talking about when I say the cam sleeve, this is the part I'm talking about. You could even see a little surface rust on this one, but this one came out no problem. But this gets rusted into the sleeve of the bushing, and what you have to do is you got to cut on either side so you can free the lower control arm from the frame. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get the blade in between the frame member and the bushing, and we're going to cut on either side so we can get the lower control arm out. If you find that the blade is kind of hanging up on the bushing in the frame, you can get a screwdriver or pry bar in here, and you could pry it out a little bit to give yourself a little more room to cut so it's not binding up in between the 2 pieces. There's one side cut out. The front side's a little bit tighter between the bushing and the frame, so I might have to use the screwdriver to push this out a little bit to get room for the blade. This is just something that Sean thought of. I'm using my knee on my left leg to kind of push the lower control arm over to where I have a continual gap between the bushing and the frame. I was trying to keep a screwdriver in there to have room to cut, but it wasn't working. So this seems to be working by just holding pressure this way with my leg to keep room between the bushing and the frame member to cut. Seems to be working pretty good. Just broke it off. My reciprocating saw is getting a little tired, but now we can get the control arm out. And you could see where we cut. We cut the cam sleeve off on this side on the front, and then same thing on the other side, just right at the edge of the bushing. I want to show you the difference between 2 techniques to cut the bushing out of the frame. The first one is to get the blade in between here and the frame member, but it could be a little tight. And on the passenger side, unfortunately, the blade was just a little bit crooked and it was digging into the side of the frame. So I made like a little groove into my frame member, which kind of pissed me off. And I didn't like that. So I tried another method, which I knew was going to be a lot harder to cut through. And I cut through the bushing and the sleeve. And you could see how much thicker that is. Compared to this, look how much more material you have to cut through. It more than doubles your cutting time, but when you do that, it prevents you from making the mistake I did and having the blade rub up against the frame member a little bit and do a little damage to your frame. If you have really good blades, if you follow our lead and get those Diablo Demon carbide tip blades, you can get through this material. You just have to have a little patience. You either can cut through the bushing and the cam sleeve or just the cam sleeve. It's your choice. So this side, the cam sleeve wasn't locked into the bushing, so I was cutting right in here on that opposing side. I was cutting right in between this sleeve and the control arm, right down the center. In order to use the press to get these bushings out, we're going to utilize a bearing splitter, and you want to get the bearing splitter in between this part of the bushing and the control arm, and you can see that it's pretty much mated all the way up against it. There's really no way to get the blade of this bearing splitter in between there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a cold chisel and we're going to pound out a little bit on this side and on the other side to see if we can get this bearing splitter in between the control arm and the bushing. If we can't, this idea is not going to work, but I've seen one guy do it already. This guy Andy, who's on Toyota4Runner.org, he posted a video of actually being able to successfully do it with the press. So I'm going to see if I can get this bearing splitter in between the control arm and the bushing. So I'm going to take a cold chisel and I'm going to use a hammer and I'm going to pound this sleeve down on both sides. I created an area where I can get that bearing splitter because I want the bearing splitter to bite right in this area, so when I'm doing the press work, the bearing splitter is going to be pushing up against the sleeve of this control arm. That's where I want to be able to get the bearing splitter in, right in there. Now I have the opposing side bent down, and now I'm going to see if I can get that bearing splitter firmly attached in between the bushing and the control arm. Before we show the actual pressing of the bushing out of the control arm, I wanted to give you a better visualization of what this bearing splitter is doing for you. Here's a bushing that's already out, and you're bending up these tabs to where you can get the bearing splitter in position between the lower control arm and the bushing sleeve. Here's where you want the blades of the bearing splitter resting on. They're resting on the edges of the lower control arm sleeves. So you have the bearing splitter in between the bushing sleeve and the lower control arm. And this bearing splitter is supporting the arm. Your bushing's here and your press sleeve is right here. Then you have this other piece that comes with the press sleeve kit on top. We're driving down with the 20-ton hydraulic press downward on the top of here. Underneath the assembly, we're going to have either a long socket or a short socket depending on which side we're working on, and you'll see the reason why in a few minutes. As the press is pushing down on this whole assembly, the socket underneath is going to be driving upward and is going to drive that bushing up into this press sleeve. The whole reason for this bearing splitter is it's supporting this press sleeve as you're driving force down. If you didn't have the blades of the bearing splitter firmly grabbing the sleeves of the control arm, then this would be able to slide down the control arm and gouge your control arm. So you want the blades firmly capturing the sleeves of the lower control arm before you start to do your press work. And I hope that makes sense. All right, so here's the setup for the press work. We have the bearing splitter, and it's a big bearing splitter, and I'll put a link to this bearing splitter that I got from OTC. The bearing splitter is in between the bushing sleeve and the control arm. you have a big press sleeve on the top with the adapter, and that's so the bushing has somewhere to go. So this big sleeve is much bigger than the diameter of the bushing. As we start to apply force downward with the 20-ton hydraulic press, there's a 24 millimeter impact socket that's going to start compressing, and it's going to push the sleeve up through the control arm and into that upper press sleeve. We're not just going to use brute force with the 20-ton press. I am going to apply some heat, just like we do in the first video with the bottle jack technique. I'm going to heat this up a little bit first, just to make it a little bit easier to push that bushing out of the control arm. Okay, I think it's been heated up enough. We're going to start pressing this thing down. It's already pressing out. It's going really easy, actually. And when things go flying, you know you're done. Here's the bushing. There's a fair amount of rust on here, so I think it was a good idea to heat it up. And you can tell when you're operating the press handle how much force is needed to do the job. And I can tell you that because I heated it up a pretty good amount, the amount of force that was required to get this bushing through the control arm was minimal. It was very minimal, so it worked really well. Because of the way the lower control arm is shaped, we can't use the same setup for the opposite side. We had to change things around. Number one, we're not using a tall 24 millimeter impact socket now. We're using a short 28 millimeter socket. The other change we made is that because the control arm is hitting the cross member of the press, we had to lower the assembly down lower to where we can get directly centered below the 20-ton press. So we're using a 1/2 inch plate, and the only 1/2 inch plate I have currently in my garage is a pretty short one. We got it onto the cross member just with the corners, and fingers crossed, with some heat, we're not going to apply too much force to bend this plate. Ideally, you would have a much longer 1/2 inch plate to go all the way across the cross member and capture it really well. But this is the best we can do for right now. So just like the other one, we're going to use heat. I think that's plenty of heat. Now we're going to see how this works. This one's taking a little bit more force than the other one, but it seems to be working just fine. And there it is.
What's your gloves? Where's your gloves?
That one's not too hot. So the plate held pretty good, but I am going to go to a fabrication shop and I am going to buy a bigger 1/2 inch plate that will capture the full width of the press cross member. The main reason for this video was to offer you another way to do the press work because we had heard that people had destroyed their control arms using the bottle jack technique. Since we like the press method of using the bench vise, I went ahead and installed my lower control arm bushings just using the bench vise like I did in the first video. But then I started thinking maybe people will want to use the press for the whole job. So here's how you would set it up. You're going to have to do two different type of setups because of the way the control arm is shaped. Just like we had to do two different setups to do the press work out of the bushings. We're going to show the setup for this side first. The diameter of this press sleeve has to be big enough to capture this sleeve of the lower control arm, but the inner diameter has to be big enough for the bushing to fit through it. So you have to select the right size that's going to support the arm but still allow the bushing to go through. First, get your press cross member at the right height. Right now on this 20-ton Harbor Freight press, we have it on the third notch down. You get your press sleeve that's going to support the lower control arm onto a plate, and then you put the control arm sleeve on top. You get your bushing on, and then you grab a press sleeve that's going to capture this outer sleeve of the bushing, the widest part of the bushing you want to capture. It's going to fit over this but capture the widest part. Then you grab your adapter that goes on the top, you center it underneath the press, and then you start driving down, and you just drive it down to where it fully seats, to where this bushing lip fully seats against the control arm, and you're done. So that's how you would set it up for this side of the lower control arm. If we try to use the same setup on the opposite side, it's not going to work because you can't center the arm of the lower control arm underneath the press. You see the height of this press sleeve that's going to support the arm, and the way the lower control arm is shaped, it hits the cross member of the press. It doesn't allow us to center the lower control arm directly underneath the 20-ton bottle jack. So it doesn't work, so we have to do something different. Just like we show when we're showing the pressing of the bushing in using the bench vise, you could use the same trick that we used with the bench vise by using a channel locks as part of your tools to press it in. The channel locks are really low. It's not going to jack up the assembly to where the lower control arm is going to hit this cross member. So what the jaws of the channel locks are going to do is they're going to capture just the edges of this lower control arm and support it while you're pressing the bushing in. So you don't want the jaws of the channel locks going into the inner diameter here to where it's going to hit the bushing as it's pressing through. So it's just going to capture the very edges. So with the lower control arm being supported on the very edges, you get your new bushing in place. You get the appropriate size press sleeve that's going to go over the top of this but capture the outer sleeve. And then you get your press sleeve plate that goes over the top, and then you just start driving it down to where the sleeve meets up with the lower control arm, and you're done. So that's how you can set up the press to do this side of the lower control arm. All right, we're done with this job. We thought it was good to show you an optional way to do the press work in case you were struggling with the bottle jack technique and you started thinking, hey, I'm using a lot of force here and it's not happening, and even with a lot of heat it's still not happening. So instead of destroying your lower control arms, you put it on the press that you own, or maybe you take it to a machine shop or a buddy has a press and you do it that way. The downside to the press is you do need some additional things like that big bearing splitter that captures the lower control arm so you could actually accomplish it with a press. If you don't own a bearing splitter, it's going to be more of an expense. As you saw in part 1 and now in part 2, it's really nice to have an extra person with an extra set of hands to help you get everything in position, whether you're getting everything in position on the hydraulic press or you're getting everything positioned on the vise. That extra set of hands is really nice to have to be successful with this job without destroying your lower control arms. Use moderate force with that bottle jack. Don't go crazy. If it's not happening and you see the arms start to spread a little bit, stop and reevaluate. Sometimes the bottle jack might be just a little bit cocked and it's actually putting pressure on the sleeve, not perfectly center in line. So maybe just a reset of the bottle jack is all you need. Maybe it's a little bit more heat. Just know that pure brute force is maybe not the best thing to do with these lower control arms, because guys have destroyed them, and then that's going to cost you a lot of time either going to a pick and pull trying to grab one, or it's going to cost you a lot of money to buy another one. So don't destroy your lower control arm. All right, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We'll be back with more videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Take care. Bye-bye.
Timmy.